Huffcutt at the Morrison Mary Wiley Library, and I have another installment of our book, Miss Hickory. This is Chapter 4. Squirrel Finds a Live Nut. Squirrel had decided that it was high time to begin getting ready for the winter. He had been putting off storing nuts from day to day all autumn because the bright first days were such a delight to him. He liked to scurry through the fallen leaves in the woods with their rustling light dance music to his quick little ears. He loved to scamper up the trees to a topmost branch, balance on the end of a bough, swing gaily, then jump to another tree. When these games were done, he would sit in the sunshine on a stone wall, frisking and admiring his beautiful tail. That was what Squirrel was doing one day in late October, sitting on the stones with the sun shining warm on his back and his beautiful tail held high like a plume when he found the peanut. There's a picture of Squirrel with his peanut. It had been left there on the stone wall for Chipmunk, who was now living in luxury in the corncob house underneath the lilac bush that had once been Miss Hickory's home. Chipmunk was so pleased at having a roof over his head that he seldom visited his old wall. Squirrel held the peanut in his paws. He sniffed it, he rattled it. Just what I need for a Sunday dinner next winter, he thought. I will bury it at once. But as quickly as his good intention came, it left him. Too thin a shell to keep, Squirrel decided. I may not see another peanut until spring, and with that he cracked and ate it. As soon as Squirrel had enjoyed the peanut, his conscience began to trouble him. It is high time that I began to get ready for the winter, he chattered, and off to the woods he scampered, where with no difficulty at all he found a sweet ripe beech nut. He was no longer hungry, so he dug a deep hole beside the beech tree, buried the nut, and feeling very pleased with himself, ran a little way through the drifts of leaves with quick dancing steps. But Squirrel had not gone far when his stomach began to feel empty. One peanut is nothing for a young man as active as I, he said to himself. I shall dig up that beech nut for a little snack. Alas, when Squirrel retraced his footsteps to a beech tree, dug fast and deep at the roots, he could not find his nut. There were many beech trees in the woods, all of them much alike, and Squirrel had forgotten the one beneath which he had buried the nut. Very poor memory on my part, he said to himself. I must try again. This time Squirrel found a plump acorn, good winter food because of its rich meat. He dug another hole, deeper and close to an oak tree. He buried his acorn, and in order to make no mistake about finding it, he placed a bright red vine beside the hole for a marker. Then Squirrel was off again, climbing trees, waving his beautiful tail and feeling satisfied with himself. The exercise gave Squirrel an appetite. At the end of an hour he was again hungry. That one stale peanut was not a meal for me, he repeated to himself. What I need is a large meaty acorn, rich in vitamins. So Squirrel went back to an oak tree that had a bright red vine at its roots. He dug and dug. He scurried from one spot to another. He excavated here, there, hither, and yon. Alas, the woods were full of oak trees with bright red vines trailing on the ground around them. Squirrel had forgotten where he had buried a nut for his winter store. Miss Hickory's first thought after she had settled herself in Robin's nest in the apple tree on Mackintosh Lane was about new clothes. In spite of her stiff twig body and nut head, Miss Hickory was intensely feminine. Also, she knew that a blue and white check gingham dress and a white cap with ruffles and ties were not suitable for winter wear. She had made another discovery, too, since moving. She had found out that she was not nearly so dependent upon store goods as when she had been living in her corncob house under the lilac bush. She had filled nooks of her nest with wild rose hips, partridge berries, and checkerberries. She had rearranged Robin's carelessly built walls so that she could hang things on the sticks, and she had taught herself how to stitch and tailor with pine needles. The woods were full of lovely stuffs for her sewing. Velvety leaves not yet dried and colored rose, gold, scarlet, and russet. Soft, beautiful mosses of many different kinds, furry ones that grew close to the ground, traily ones, upstanding, feathery ones like plumes. And each moss was green and everlasting. The tiny brown cones of the large trees made excellent buttons. The soft lining of the fern fronds made Miss Hickory's winter underwear. She spent many happy hours alone and busy in the woods collecting materials and sitting on a toadstool sewing. The winter wardrobe she designed and fitted to herself was a model of style and utility. Since she had become so like the woods in her dress and habits, she was almost invisible as she took her way among the evergreens and the falling leaves. That was why Squirrel did not see her. He was so confused at forgetting where he had buried his nuts that he was talking to himself. Nutty, in the broader sense of the word, Squirrel said aloud. That seems to be growing on me. So I have noticed. Squirrel jumped. The voice was sharp and elderly. But when he found courage to follow the voice, he came to a small person sitting on a toadstool, her feet in their bark shoes swinging, and her dress gay enough for going to a party. She looked blithe and young due to her costume, but Miss Hickory's sharp nose was even sharper, and her black eyes were piercing. She wore a dress of layer upon layer of golden beech leaves. Her coat was made of short, low-growing moss, thick and warm, with tiny larch cones for buttons and a border of creeping pine. Her close-fitting hat was little more than a cap, but smart. It matched her coat, being made of green moss, and it had a bunch of red elderberries and one moss plume for trimming. She had made herself a little round muff of a scarlet maple leaf and had lined it with fern down. She looked years younger. Squirrel thought her enchanting. "Hi, cutie," he greeted her. "Mind your manners, my lad," Miss Hickory warned him. "I have been watching you for some time. I don't approve of your scatterbrained ways. You seem to have a very poor memory." "How true. I was spoiled as a child," he told her sadly. "An only child who had all the nuts I wanted given me. I was not a strong child either." Squirrel wiped an imaginary tear from his eye with one gray paw. At the word nuts, Miss Hickory started. She pulled her hat down lower to hide the shape of her head. She got down from the toadstool and backed into a thicket of young hemlock shoots. There she is, talking to him. "Excuses! Nothing but a tall story," she called shrilly. "You are one of a large family, I know, for I watched you growing up. Your mother taught you to hide nuts." She stopped, covering her mouth with her muff. Nut, the one word she should have avoided. Squirrel's ears rose. He came closer to Miss Hickory and peered into her face. She could not turn her head away from him. Squirrel sniffed her. He tapped her nose playfully. "A nut! That's what you think I am," he chattered. "How about you? Where did you get your head?" She turned and hurried away, but Squirrel followed her. She could run fast, but he leaped. Over stubble and stones, out of the woods and through the jungle of dry sumac bushes, he pursued her. Miss Hickory climbed the stone wall into the orchard, but Squirrel jumped over it and was waiting for her on the other side. Squirrel's sharp white teeth showed in a grin as they came to Mackintosh Lane, but surprisingly he did not touch her. As a matter of fact, all Squirrel wanted was a race. Up in her apple tree, Miss Hickory scrambled. She dashed into her nest, looking over the edge fearfully. Squirrel was down below on the ground. "Hickory, Miss Hickory is my name," she called to him, trying to awe Squirrel and saying exactly what she had not intended to divulge. "So I thought when I saw your head," he replied. "Such a good race, was it not? There's nothing like a cross-country run on a frosty morning for getting one home in time for dinner." "Home?" she gasped. "Why, yes, quite a coincidence, Miss Hickory," Squirrel chattered on. "I have my hole right here at the foot of your tree. My mother left it to me in her will." This is Chapter 5, Miss Hickory's Good Deed. Hen Pheasant and Miss Hickory left the brush pile in the pine wood. Side by side they crossed the orchard, turned into the field called High Mowing, and walked toward the wild lot across from the old place where blueberries grew. "Cock is away on business?" Miss Hickory asked. "I saw him coming along this way early." Hen Pheasant, a drab little creature with neither color nor liveliness, gave a mournful cluck. "Now in November Cock has left me," she told Miss Hickory. "He has moved to the other side of the brush pile. He does not let me have any breakfast." "Is that the custom?" Miss Hickory asked. Looking at Hen Pheasant, she saw there was no glamorous creature like Cock Pheasant, who walked in grandeur, his tail feathers trailing like ribbons of rainbow. "He left me last autumn, too," Hen Pheasant said. "He began to neglect me about this time. Every morning when I walked behind Cock at a respectful distance, when we came to a feeding place, he turned and pecked me home again." "Brutal! No gentleman!" Miss Hickory stamped her foot. "What did you do about it, Hen?" "Nothing," she answered dolefully. And there's a picture of Hen and Miss Hickory. There seemed to be little left to say, so they went on side by side in silence. Miss Hickory, since she had found out the squirrel lived at the roots of her apple trees on Mackintosh Lane, had stayed away from her nest as much as possible. Squirrel had not molested her, but she valued her head too highly to take any risks. One evening, when she had hung up her hat and undressed and settled down within her downy bed and covered herself, she was startled to see two bright eyes peering at her. Squirrel had climbed up and was looking over the rim of her nest, but he came no farther. "Just came up to be neighborly," he chattered. "Pleasant dreams." Then he was gone. Pleasant dreams, indeed! Miss Hickory had put on her hat and pulled it down tightly. She had not slept a wink, and ever since that night she had worn her hat to bed. So now in November she was down the tree about every day, enjoying the autumn leaves. They enfolded her in color. They lay beneath her feet, blowing on their merry stems to keep her company. They spread a carpet of russet, gold, and scarlet upon the mountain. Miss Hickory saw new colors each day as the mountain changed from the flames of the maples to the rosy glow of the turning oaks. She was never cold, for her sap was running well. She thought it silly that Hen Pheasant should feel sorry for herself at so bright a season of the year. Hen Pheasant trudged silently along, her head low. Miss Hickory turned on her at last. "If I were in your place, Hen, I wouldn't allow it," she scolded. "I should teach him to be a gentleman." "How?" Hen asked mildly. "That is the custom among the cocks. Some autumns they allow us to have breakfast with them, sometimes not." "Are you a school teacher?" she asked curiously. "I plan to take over a school next spring." The idea had just popped into Miss Hickory's head. "Then you have brains. Perhaps you can advise me." As a matter of fact, Miss Hickory could think of no means of teaching Cock Pheasant good manners, but just then they came upon a surprise. They came suddenly upon a shelter for wintering birds where high mowing ended and the blueberry pasture began. The mower would have been called slack by anyone who did not understand him. In truth, he was very kind. He had allowed the tall grasses and the weeds to grow high where a stone wall made a windbreak. There were some ears of corn left standing there also for food. It was a better winter home for Hen Pheasant than the rough brush pile in the woods. Miss Hickory clapped her hands. "Look, Hen," she shrilled, "something has turned up." Hen Pheasant stepped into the shelter and pecked at a few kernels of corn, but her small gray head still drooped and her feathers hung, draggled and slack. Miss Hickory lost patience. "Hold your head up, Hen. Here you are in a winter shelter with seeds and corn on your doorstep, and you droop. Hold your head up, I say, and be thankful." "I won't be allowed to stay here," Hen Pheasant sighed, her head still lower. "Cock will cluck me out." That, Miss Hickory saw, was exactly what might happen. Cock Pheasant would come along over the snow, its feathers brushing a line of gold and scarlet against the white. He would come upon the shelter beside the stone wall with the stalks of corn and the grasses that the mower had left. He would drive Hen out and move in himself. The situation seemed hopeless. Miss Hickory thought hard-headedly. She drew upon her past. "Hen," she said at last, "are there other hens in the same difficulty as you?" "All of us. Our cocks refuse to nest with us in the winter. They live together in a club on the other side of the brush pile until spring." "Then," Miss Hickory told her, "you must do the same. You must all make yourselves comfortable until spring, right here. If you take a stand, no cock will dare to drive you out. You must form a Ladies' Aid Society." "How? I don't know what you mean." But Hen Pheasant raised her dull little eyes to Miss Hickory's snapping ones. "Easy enough. The first thing that the Ladies' Aid Society of Hillsboro does every autumn is to start making a bed quilt. They sew together pretty pieces of cloth that they have gathered and saved, flowery pieces, plain pieces, but all colored. They meet at the town hall once a week to make their patch squares into one large quilt of many colors. Then they line it, stuff it, and quilt it on a frame. They sell their quilt in the spring at a church fair. But you, Hen, might as well keep yours and use it this winter." Hen Pheasant's slow working mind reeled. Not a word of Miss Hickory's good idea had she understood. "So, patches, Ladies' Aid?" she mumbled. "Yes." Miss Hickory hurried over to the edge of the woods and was gone for a few moments. She returned with some sharp green pine needles and 4 straight and slender branches for a quilting frame. She then gathered 4 beautiful fallen leaves, a russet oak leaf, a yellow beech leaf, a red maple leaf, and a golden maple leaf. She laid them together in a pattern of patchwork before Hen Pheasant and showed her how to sew them together with a pine needle and a thread of dried grass. That's her teaching right there. It pleased Hen Pheasant. She took a pine needle in one claw and began stitching the patch of leaves. Sewing seemed to come to her naturally. "Look up at the mountains," Miss Hickory said, "for your patterns and colors, and your quilt will be the only one of its kind. The ladies of the Ladies' Aid Society make patch quilts indoors. They also have a colored mountain to look at, but they like to make up their own pattern." Hen Pheasant looked up at Temple Mountain, shining in the sun, glowing with its autumn leaves. Scarlet sumac at the foot, green pines on top, layer on layer of the bright oaks and maples between. She had never looked at it before, having always felt sorry for herself when the leaves began to turn. Even to glance at that beauty brightened her. "Now here," Miss Hickory went on, working briskly, "is your quilting frame." She tied the 4 branches together with straw and grasses to make a square frame. "When you finish the patches and sew them together to make your quilt, tie it on this frame and sew it up and down, back and forth. That is called quilting. And oh, I forgot to tell you, the other thing the Ladies' Aid Society does is to eat. They have a big dinner on the days when they meet in the town hall to work on their quilt." But Hen Pheasant scarcely heard her. She had gathered herself a pile of corn over which she was clucking, singing a little tune of happiness, stitching a patch of leaves, pecking a kernel or two now and then. Miss Hickory went softly away. Hen Pheasant did not see her go. She's all right now, safe for the winter. I will stop at the brush pile and tell the other hens where they may join her. I will explain to them about the Ladies' Aid Society. Miss Hickory felt rather like a Boy Scout as she walked briskly towards the woods. And that's the end of chapter 5.